What are these confusing words and why are they so called? Well, test makers at GMAT create various traps in the main point question answer choices to confuse students. They often use words which appear to be similar in meaning but are actually quite distinguishable from each other. Below are some examples of such confusing words like describe, analyze, argue, establish, and so on. With other words in an answer choice remaining almost the same, often it is words like these that leave a student confused. To many of you, argue and analyze or describe and analyze might appear to be nearly the same, but therein lies the trap. In the next slide, we will look at some more such words which we have grouped together based on the similarity as well as the differences between them. Remember, this grouping has been done for the sake of helping you identify the difference and avoid confusion related to confused words. Here is the grouping of some frequently occurring confusing words in the main point answer choices. Let us explain further. The words within each group have nearly the same meaning in the context of GMAT main point answer choices. For example, the words in group 1, describe, explain, discuss, present, have similar connotations. They all refer to talking about something or someone in detail. Likewise, all the words in group 2 mean to judge or study or examine the pros and cons of something in order to calculate its importance or to discover something more about it. The words in group 3 all imply the author's disagreement or doubt. The words in group 4 mean that the author wants to prove or assert something or some belief of his own. You might be wondering, I understand that each of these groups and the words in them have different meanings, but where exactly lies the confusion? Well, let us see for ourselves. As a student, we are sure you're rarely confused between words of the same group. For example, you would hardly sweat over describe and explain, or challenge and question, or establish and prove. But surely there have been times when you found yourself wondering what really was the difference between discuss and evaluate, or evaluate and challenge, or discuss and establish. So you see, the confusion is mostly between words of different groups, and GMAT plays on that aspect. But once you are able to identify the factors that distinguishes the words of one group from the other, you will easily sail through the confusion. Let us now see what these differentiating factors are and how they help us distinguish between the confusing words. So here is a table, the first half of which you have already gone through. This half has the grouping of words with similar meanings. Below each group, we have listed the one important factor that distinguishes it from the other groups. Let us explain further. For example, the words of the first group are used when there is a lot of detail and explanation in the passage, but there is no specific conclusion stating the author's agreement or disagreement or any other opinion. On the other hand, the words of group 2 are used when distinctly the pros and cons of something have been discussed and the author has stated his opinion clearly at the end of the passage after examining these pros and cons. So the difference between the two groups is essentially the presence of pros and cons along with the author's opinion on them. Likewise, the words of group 3 are used to explicitly show that the author doubts or disagrees with something. In this case, the conclusion always has the author's disapproval or questioning something that is believed to be true. The words of group 4 implies the opposite of group 3. Here the author, instead of raising doubts, is all set to clarify and claim something to be true. Usually there is hardly any confusion between the words of group 3 and 4 as they are diametrically opposite. But there exists confusion among the others. So let us see which of the groups are the most commonly confused ones. Generally, the confusion exists between the words of group 1 and 2, or group 2 and 3, or group 1 and 4, and so on. We have taken these groups as examples because of their common occurrence. You can easily figure out the difference between any two other combinations by understanding the underlying differentiating factors that we have discussed earlier. Now that we have understood what confusing words are and what are the differentiating factors we need to look out for, let us further demonstrate how to avoid the trap of confusing words with the help of a few examples. In each example, we have taken the paragraph summaries of passages that you have already seen in the paragraph summary concept file and the main point concept file. Let us get started. In this slide, we will see how to differentiate between words of group 1 and group 2 when they are used in the main point answer choice. We will show you two versions of the same passage and use these to demonstrate how to use the differentiating factor of the two groups to solve the confusion of confusing words. In version 1, we have two paragraph summaries. The first talks about the opinions that exist for both for and against the medical use of marijuana. The second paragraph talks about the benefits of medical marijuana as shown by some researchers in the past. Let us see what version 2 says. Version 2 of the same passage says the same thing for the first two paras. The second and third paras have been added to show you how the main point will change for the second version. The third para says the author is talking about the side effects of medical marijuana. And the fourth para is talking about how research conducted under limited circumstances has been unclear and inconclusive about medical marijuana and its benefits. Now, if we compare the two versions and we'll try to look at the main points that can be derived about these two versions, what would it be? How will we decide which of these two main points is the main point of version 1? If we read them, they sound and look as if they are same. They are using words like discuss and evaluate, which are often confusing to the students. But we already know the differentiating factor. The differentiating factor is that if it is evaluate, there would be pros and cons present in the passage and there would be a conclusion mentioning the author's opinion. In this version of the passage, we do not have any cons of the medical marijuana usage. Neither do we have any conclusion stating the author's opinion about this passage, about the usage of medical marijuana. Therefore, we know right away that the answer to this question here, the main point of this version is to discuss the potential benefits of medical marijuana. The main point is not to evaluate the medical use of marijuana because there are no cons discussed and there is no conclusion mentioned here specifically. On the other hand, in case of version 2, we have the cons mentioned as well as we have the author's conclusion in the last paragraph. And so we know right away that the author is not merely discussing the benefits of medical marijuana, but is actually evaluating the medical use, the medical importance of marijuana. See how easy it becomes to differentiate between the confusing words once you know what are the differentiating factors between them. We have more such examples in store for you. Let's get on with it. In this slide, we will show you how to use the differentiating factor to solve the confusion between words of group 2 and group 3. We have taken the examples of evaluate versus challenge. For evaluate, we have chosen the version 1 that was previously displayed as version 2 in the slide. You're already familiar with this. Here, the author is talking about opinions existing both for and against medical marijuana. Then he goes on to talk about the benefits, that is the pros of medical marijuana. Then he talks about the cons of medical marijuana. And finally, he gives his verdict, he gives his conclusion that the research is inconclusive. So we know right away that the main point or the main intention of the author here was to evaluate the medical use of marijuana. And we can easily rule out challenge here. But what if in version 2 we had something else given? And the main point options would have been the same. That is challenge and evaluate. Let's see what we would have done then or how we should have avoided the confusion then. So in version 2, the first two paragraphs remain the same. That is, the first paragraph talks about pros and cons existing for the medical use of marijuana, and the second paragraph talks about the pros. Let's see what the third paragraph adds. Well, in the third paragraph, the author is saying that the research mentioned earlier was not conducted according to the FDA recommendations, and therefore those results cannot be trusted. In other words, the author is raising doubts or is questioning the results of the research. We already know that whenever the author expresses disagreement or doubts about something already believed to be true, then those words belong to group 3. And in this case, if we are faced with some other sort of doubt raising, like let's say the author is saying that the study size of the group in the research was very small and therefore the research results cannot be trusted, or there was some other research that was providing contradictory results, then we would also know that the author was raising questions against the research mentioned earlier. In this case, if we had to choose between these two main points, we would know straight away that because of the author's disagreement there in the last para, this is the question where the author is challenging the potential benefits. He is not evaluating the medical use of marijuana. He is actually challenging whatever the research results have yielded. See again how easy it was to use the differentiating factor to understand and solve the confusion between words like challenge and evaluate. I'm sure you have been confused in the past, but I'm also sure that you will no longer remain confused in the future whenever you come across these two words. Good. Now let us see another example, the last of this particular concept file. In this slide, we are going to discuss words from group 1 and group 4. We have taken examples of discuss versus establish. Here we'll be using another passage from a previous concept file, the ones that we used in the main point question, the main point concept file. Let us see what version 1 of this passage says. In version 1, the first paragraph is talking about the major causes behind two crises, that is the opioid crisis and the financial crisis, and what was common behind the major causes in those two crisis situations. In the second paragraph, the author gives a detailed explanation about the major cause behind the financial crisis. That is, the initial unethical hook strategies, how they brought about the financial crisis. In the third paragraph, the author elaborates upon the major cause behind the opioid crisis. That is, the initial promotional offers, how they brought about the opioid crisis. By looking at these three para summaries, we know straight away that here the author is talking about the major causes behind the two crises, and that is all. If you look at version 2 of this passage, the first three paragraphs are the same. That is, the first one mentions the major causes and the common risks between the opioid crisis and the financial crisis. The second para and the third para elaborate upon the major causes behind the two crises respectively. Let us see what the fourth paragraph says. Well, the fourth paragraph is saying, oh, here the author's opinion has been stated. The author is saying it was the unethical practices that were mentioned in the earlier paragraphs that may have yielded instant gratification, that is short-term returns, benefits, but they led to severe long-term consequences in the form of crisis. So clearly here, the author is trying to provide his own opinion. He's trying to prove something. He's trying to prove that it was the unethical practices that brought about the long-term downside. Now, if we were given to choose between these two main points, which one would we choose for which version? Let us see. We already know that if the author is merely discussing the pros and cons, or if he is just looking at the details without giving his opinion, then he is merely discussing or presenting or describing something. And we know for version 1 right away, the correct answer is this one. Discuss the major causes behind and the commonality of risks in opioid crisis and financial crisis. Here, the author is not trying to prove specifically and particularly that it was the unethical practices which led to the long-term losses. On the other hand, if we look at version 2, the author is very emphatically emphasizing on the fact that it was the unethical practices that yielded instant gratification but led to long-term losses. So we know that the author is not merely discussing the major causes. He's actually trying to establish that the unethical practices, which were the major causes behind the crisis, they led to short-term gains but resulted in long-term losses. So once again, you see how if you know the differentiating factors between the various groups that we have outlined, it becomes very, very easy, almost a cakewalk for you to decide which one to choose if you are given these two options. I'm sure now with those three examples, you are very, very sure how to use the differentiating factors when facing confusion regarding these words used in the main point answer choices. But there is a small thing to remember. Let us see what it is. Remember when you are looking at an answer choice and you are facing confusion because of the confusing words there. Remember not just to look at the confusing words and decide your answer choice. Please look at the rest of the statement also because the other details given in the answer choice are equally important. And if you do not look at them carefully, you may miss out on something really important. Let us explain with the help of an example. Look at these two sentences. One says, evaluate the medical use of marijuana. So we already know that in this case, the author will be discussing the pros and cons of medical use of marijuana and probably stating his own conclusion. Let us look at this statement. Discuss the pros and cons of medical marijuana to assess its medical use. Now we already know that assessing and evaluating belong to the same group. And in this sentence, it is specifically given that pros and cons have been discussed. By and large, we can understand and we should understand that these two sentences mean the same thing. Be very sure, therefore, to look at all the other details of the sentence and not just concentrate on confusing words. Let us now summarize the entire concept file quickly.